So we'll move on. Okay. 5 dysfunctions of a team. So if we just scroll through for a bit, if you can, Debbie, thank you. Great. This pyramid comes from a book, which again is in the reference list later on, called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. I would suggest anybody reads this book. It's a seminal book. And the interesting thing is it's written as a story. It's not written as a reference book, as a manual, about a fictitious CEO in Silicon Valley who was thrown in to deal with a problem within a business and had existing team members. And it was about how she dealt with them and the observations she made on our previous leadership and managerial experience. The key one here, of course, is the absence of trust. Very important here is if you've got team members that don't trust each other, right, you've got a fundamental problem, right? I'm observing that at the moment. I'm involved in an organization where we have volunteers and we also have staff people. And there is evidence that there is a mistrust between them, right? And that's not helping. Things move not just forward, but generally backwards. But the key point here is that the trust piece is the bedrock. It sits at the base. That's why it's in the pyramid. But you can imagine all these other elements will also stop teams working effectively. A fear of conflict. Now here, conflict doesn't mean conflicting with other team members. It means confrontation, and confrontating in a positive way. It means confronting issues rather than people. If people stay quiet, you're never going to surface the problem. It's going to stay below the waterline. Lack of commitment, all sorts of reasons could, generate a lack of commitment. Could be the lack of trust and people disengaging, right? But everybody knows that lack of commitment is not going to get the results. The avoidance of accountability. This is one of my big things here. It's amazing how many times we see it, sometimes in the political world and other areas, where people just aren't accountable for either themselves, the results, their behavior, and they try and pass the buck, right? A good team will hold themselves personally accountable, but they'll also hold the team accountable for results as well. That is a good team dynamic. And finally, this is probably a bit more transactional, but very important, is inattention to results. Quite often, if we're not performing well or a team's not performing well, they'll find other ways of saying, well, actually, we're doing really okay. But overall, we might not be. We may not be being, we may be ignoring the fundamentals of what's going on. We may be ignoring the key result. Again, this is quite interesting with a lot of lean thinking about focusing, using a laser-sighted rifle to focus on the real things and ignore the non-value adding stuff. So this is very powerful, and I would urge you to go and read the book. As we scroll through the animations, you'll see the reference there to Patrick Lencioni.
If I can just add there, yeah, sure. John, in terms of absence of trust within the team, I think when you've got a team that's a core center of an organization that is not functioning at a high level of trust, you've got the same problem internally as you've got externally, because you can't expect people from the outside of that team to trust the individuals in that team either. So, you're lost from both angles, internally and externally, because there's a mistrust in general.
Thank you, Viv. So we'll just, on the right-hand side of the slide as it scrolls up, we'll see just some of my experience, and again, discussing with our team as well, ways of actually dealing, particularly with trust and how you can actually build a team. I call this the management pyramid here. I mean, okay, we've all seen something before, but if we actually look at bandwidth, if we try and solve the problems ourselves as leaders and directors, right, our bandwidth is very narrow. It's basically the pointy part of the pyramid, right? If we were able to push that down the organization with the right controls, the right resources and support, etc., we increase our bandwidth. Certainly as an engineer, and that's my historical boundary, I've seen loads of engineers trying to solve problems because that's what they believe they were put on the earth to do without engaging their teams. The people at the lower ends of the organization, and I don't mean that in any way to denigrate them, they're the process experts. They know what is happening on a day-to-day basis. So the more that you can, engage at each level, right, the better that you're going to be. We've just got a couple of illustrations as we go through the animations here to go and show this. If we can just carry through the animations, Debbie, thank you. As you can see there, the effective bandwidth. And as you go down the organization, if we go to the next animation, brilliant. working bandwidth increases, in training and trust. Okay. And it's really important. There's the principle of autonomy here, right? Autonomous people work more effectively. That is proven. So maybe we can move on to the next slide here, Debbie. Okay, so this is it, the team coaching process, right? So again, you guys can read faster than I can talk, but I'll quickly whiz through these as we go through the animations here. These are the key steps, and it's impossible for us to go through all this today. So I'll let you reflect on it. But basically, it's important that and we've alluded this to already, whether it's a team or as individuals, right? We need to set the scene, right? We need to co-create the space. It's about everybody. It's that collaborative, collective responsibility. We need to agree the outcomes, right? And the outcomes may not be known actually until you work with the team. If you've been approached by a client stakeholder and they've said this team's not functioning properly, right? You may not have got total direction in terms of what the outcomes are, right? Just that the team's not working very well. So you have to go and, work with that team to do it. The outcome from the client takeover was, I want the team working more effectively. The relationship's not good. So that's a critical part of the process, right? And then obviously we do some team coaching. This is a very supportive process. And actually, Debbie, can you just go through some of the animations here so we can start to see this as I'm going through? And you can bring one-to-one coaching here. Quite often in a big team, we have 2 or 3 coaches. It's not just one coach. One to observe the team coaching process, but also, outside the actual process of the team coaching in the room, some individuals may want one-to-one coaching because they're struggling, and that's what we do. So it is a mix. It's not mutually exclusive. You don't get just team coaching where you're coaching a team, because without the individual coaching, because that would be more like team facilitation. So just before we move on to the next animations, any reflections, Siham?
Oh, sorry, Siham.
Yeah, or go.
No, go ahead, Deborah.
No, just the importance of the coach's recognition and team members' recognition that there is an opportunity there to get individual coaching, which is fundamental to the performance and moving forward of the team. It's there for the coach to recognize. It's there for the individual in the team to recognize that opportunity for coaching is there, and it's part of the service.
That's a really good point, Debbie, because that is about co-creation again. So, Siham.
Just to add that, once the team is used to the coaches being present, and they get comfort from the certainty of how things work and what to expect and so on, the experience is that they reach out, they get quite comfortable in knowing, because they've started to develop the language and understanding and awareness about their teams, they get really comfortable being able to advocate for themselves, and that includes, reaching out to one of the coaches to actually have a session, a one-to-one session, so that they can think something through specific related to that particular team, or even externally towards another function or another team that they have to interact with. So yeah, it's intervention where it's needed, but it's also self-elected by the individuals because they recognize it's helpful.
No, that's really powerful, and this is where, as you say, a one-to-one and team coaching really do overlap. So Deb, can we just go through the remaining animation? So it's an adaptive process, as we've said. There's another little graphic here, which sort of this piece here, which we're just going to go through. If we can scroll through, gives you some idea of what it's really about. Is as we talked about, the front end of the team coaching session will inevitably be more directive and structured. The coach will have to have a bit more involved, or arguably facilitation. But over time, it becomes emergent and supportive. Right, and that's the whole point. It's about co-creating the space, right? If it wasn't directive, sometimes it doesn't need to be, but if it wasn't directive, then you could end up with a bit of a stalemate and not moving forward. So this is very much a dynamic process. If you remember to the original definitions we had of team coaching, it's very clear it's dynamic. So So maybe we can just scroll through here, Debbie. So just quickly here, some sub-processes as it's scrolling through. And again, this is down to the skills, the knowledge and the experiences of growth. There might be some motivational coaching going on because, again, the team might feel a bit despondent at some point, right? The relationships aren't working right, or the objectives that they're being set by the stakeholder are not clear or unattainable. There might be a bit of a consulting coaching process, right? Sometimes that happens. Typically what I and other coaches do is if it does get to question where they want some support, direct advice, is we say, well, look, we're just going to come out of the formal coaching process slightly, and we're going to go into consulting, because what you don't want to do is lose the energy of that coaching, right? And that process. So that's quite important as well. And maybe some educational coaching processes as well. But again, this slide is just here to give you a flavor, and that's what our intent is today. So thank you. And maybe next slide, Debbie, that's okay. I've taken this from a wonderful book on relationship, organization, and Gestalt by Anne-Marie Chidiac, right? Who's a real thought leader in this area. And again, I'm not going to go through all of these because again, you can read through these, and I would urge you to go and read the book as well. The key points here is the organization of the future is changing. It's dynamic. In the past, if you look at the left-hand column here, the classic organizational design, it was very transactional. It was very rigid, right? It went in, in chunks, right? It was driven by experts driving it top down, okay? It's episodic is the word that Anne-Marie uses, okay? The practitioner is a subject matter expert, right? This is changing now, and we're seeing it already that as people get more and more engaged in the organization of the future, right? The individual or group form is a function of the relationship. It's emergent, as we talked about before. It's about heightening awareness, right? The practitioner, in which case here this means the coach, they're using their self as an instrument of change. You know, they're not directing, they just, their sense of being, the holding of the space actually supports that change, okay? And the last point here on the right, which I quite like, is change is guided by aesthetic and embodied knowledge as well as the explicit knowledge, right? You know, it's all about what people have as a group and within the team. Great. So next slide, please, Debbie. We're getting near the close now, so I'll just try and sort of sum up a few things. I guess if you're a leader here, you want to know what's the return on investment? What am I going to get? What's the value that team coaching brings here, right? And on the left-hand column, you can see some of the softer opportunities here. You know, we've touched on these already, so I'm not going to go through those in great detail, but behavioral shift, meeting effectiveness, engagement, productivity, all these things here, right? Here, productivity doesn't necessarily mean hard numbers, but how the people interact, right? Are they being effective when they talk to you? Are they wasting time? You know, people who are aficionados or study lean culture and Japanese culture, they talk about the 8 wastes, right? And wasting other people's time is considered, or waiting time, as one of the great wastes, right? When you have a team that's working and pulling together, they will react faster and they'll be more effective because they trust each other and they understand what's going on. On the right, there's some of the hard benefits. I'm not going to spend too long on those. These are outcomes, right? You know, people have used it to, you know, improve sales targets, meeting production targets, margin, profit, you name it, whatever that hard benefit is. Because ultimately, we're not just doing this for fun. You know, there has to be a hard outcome. Businesses need to survive, right? But that will be down to the client, stakeholder, and the team to work out, you know, what's really important. And again, just on the right here, there's a bit of a heuristic, and there is data, and we're trying to compile this all the time within the ICF. But you know, there is a 6-time investment, you know, return on coaching. Again, I was on a recent panel event, and they were talking about engagement, the CEO, and how much it had totally transformed the way they were doing business very, very quickly. You look at supermarkets, for instance, you know. Before they were very much an in-shop model. Now they've had to move to a home delivery model, right? You know, a few team discussions and meetings and stuff to make that change, right? Won't, in real terms, cost a huge amount, but it can totally affect the output on the profitability of that organization, because they could have lost a lot of clients, you know, during COVID, and people have had to make rapid changes and respond. I'm not trying to use COVID as an example here all the time, but it's just a really good way of understanding how dynamics have moved forward in a positive way. Next slide. Again, here, I'm not going to read all these out. I'm a big aficionado of the Japanese culture here. And if you were looking at this, if we were interacting in an event, I'd be actually saying to people, right, these are the Toyota 14 principles. Have a look at them and ask yourself, how much do these apply to team coaching? If you remember, I alluded to the fact earlier on is that change agents don't always realize is they're coaches, or even change agents, they just do what they do. But if you look at those 14, 7 of those are soft and 7 of those are hard. And I know from personal experience that when we were doing some corporate cultural transformations in my previous company, DuPont, you know, in the initial lean work that we did, we missed some of the soft ones. We focused on the hard ones because we've been through a Six Sigma program and we got our best mathematical and logical brains working on Six Sigma, and they moved across to the lean, but they weren't necessarily the most engaging people, and we missed a trick. We had to reinvent that process into a production system, and it worked, and we did a lot more coaching, and it was absolutely the coaching that made the difference. And that goes back to the 6 times return on investment. So hopefully you're getting a flavor for what's going on. If I go thinking back to the pyramid again about leadership, I've heard some recent comments about how many times where, you know, the CEO will call some coaches in to sort the leadership team out, you know, in their words, right? You know, we need to get them working better or dynamically. And then you go and coach the leadership team. And they say, well, it's not our problem at all. You know, the people down below us are not listening. And then you go onto the shop floor and the people on the shop floor say, well, no, it's not us problem, is the leadership team aren't giving us the information we need to do the job, right? So there's this, you know, there's a disconnect in the dynamic. And what Peter Hawkins said yesterday, actually, interesting enough, he was looking at these lovely bonsai trees that Japanese do. You know, you've got the trees, but look at the space between them, right? As coaches, we need to coach the space. We need to build connections between different levels in the organization to have an impact. So, okay, just a very, very quick slide as we draw to a close here. This is some of the difference between team coaching and group coaching. Both apply. The main thing with group coaching, right, is that it might be just a theme, right? You're coaching a group around a common theme, but not necessarily a common outcome, right? Whereas team coaching, you're always looking for a common outcome. So you could argue actually that it's acceptable to use more active facilitation with group coaching here, right? And it's less emergent, right? Because that's the way it is. But again, that's open to conjecture, and that's how it works. And coaches know how well they're doing because they'll get feedback, right? If it's not working. In fact, even before they get feedback from anywhere else, they will know themselves internally because that's who they are if it's not working right. And I can see Debbie smiling there. So any thoughts or reflections on that based on your experience, Debbie?
No, I mean, it's absolutely that. We know when things are not right. You know, internally, it is just talking to us and we feel it. So as you can see, I'm back to my heart again, back to following my heart, my intuition. And that's what we do, and we do it extremely well.
Yeah. And I'll just repeat what Peter said yesterday, coaching from the source rather than with effort, which is exactly what you just described there, Debbie. Thank you. So we're just drawing to a close now quickly, but again, this is, I find this is quite a good summary chart here. You know, if you want synthesis, you need elements to this, right? We talked about it in the need for change earlier on about the organizational requirements and the need for change. You do need to have an improved processes, because if the processes don't change, you're still going to have a problem. That's very much down to the client, okay? The behavioral shift will be down to the team, right? Including the coach. The team's there, the coach is there to try and support and help them with the behavioral shift, okay? But everybody needs to have a passion for change. And I look at this as a 3-legged stool. You take any one of those legs away, right? And the stool falls over like a milkmaid stool. And I've seen that. I've seen organizations that have been very good at working on coaching and behavioral shift, but no good at internal processes, right? And they may have some level of passion and it's not worked. I've seen the other way around. Very technical organizations are very good at process stuff. They don't understand the soft stuff and have not done the behavioral shift, right? And it's fallen over. I've even seen organizations that have the top two, but actually there isn't really great deal of passion for change because the tone isn't set by the leader, and that also falls over. So I find it's just quite a useful way. It always brings me back when I'm coaching, and I'm sure it's the same with the other coaches in this group. You know, are they in place? Are they working? If they're not working, then there's going to be a challenge. And a coach will see that, and they'll see an opportunity, and they'll go and challenge the right people, right? If the energy levels are not down, they'll find a way of increasing the energy levels, or they might even go back to the client stakeholder and say, look, what's going on here? What do we need to do, co-create to improve the energy and the passion? So, any thoughts on that, Debbie?
No, I'm just going back to that word synthesis. You know, that's the core of this slide. It's a very, very high level energy, and we can't move the team without getting to that stage. So hence the three-legged stool approach, which is fantastic.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll finish up. These are just final takeaways, and again, I'll let you guys read this rather than me going through them. But you know, I think Sihan mentioned it earlier on. You know, a great team coach needs to challenge and be supportive, and it's that balance, that's constant balance between challenging and supporting. It does require taking a level of personal risk, but the really important, this one here, and this is in team coaching, and this is what I've learned on my own personal team coaching and through training and everything else, from some of the great masters in coaching, like Georgina Woodstrup, for instance, right? It's about the presence. It's not about the process. You know, that's what facilitation is. Team coaching is about being present in the room, understanding the dynamic, picking up the relationships, using the intuition, being an active listener. So that's really, to me, that if you want to remember anything about coaching and team coaching, that's the point here. It's about presence. Okay, so we're just going to leave a few references here. I'll just leave these up for a minute. These are some of the great books. Marshall Goldsmith, I'm a big fan of, both Triggers and What Got You Here, What Got You There. High Performance Team Coaching, that's by Peters and Carr. That's a brilliant reference manual for team coaching. So if you want to understand some of the thinking behind it, that's good. We've talked about relationship organizational consult, Anne-Marie Chiliac. And then there's some other ones, you know, Peter Hawkins has written loads and loads of books. Leadership team coaching, 5 dysfunctions of the team. And also I will be bringing my own book out in March. It's just going through its final copy editing at the moment, Coaching for Cultural Transformation. And that's very much about how coaching can be used to support organizational change. It is not a manual on coaching. It's not a reference book. It's very much about how coaching can positively influence based on some academic theory and my own personal experience. So again, if you're interested, please look out for it in March when it comes out. So, and we'll just finish with a final slide, if that's okay. If you're interested in what we do, we're very energized at the moment. We've got a good team, and we're looking to go and work with people. Please reach out to us either via the website, on these numbers, or that email address, and we'd love to hear from you. Any final reflections, Debbie, before we finish?
No, to thank those of you for your time in listening to this webinar. Thank you very much, and we hope to hear from you.
Thank you very much indeed.